Welcome everyone to Los Angeles and California. In 1971, not too far from here, right up the street and around the corner, a woman was raped on Sunset Boulevard, and the anti-rape movement took hold in Los Angeles. That assault was the catalyst for the founding of my organization, then known as LACAW, now known as Peace Over Violence. Simultaneously, a powerful collective unconscious spread, and activists started rape crisis centers with 24-hour rape hotlines across the country. It was a heady time when the pioneering feminists started to put protests and programs together and created a movement and organizations that didn't exist before. So here we are almost 40 years later in Hollywood, gathered at one of the largest conferences ever dedicated to exploring the issues and complexities of sexual violence on the West Coast. Much has changed, but some of what was created back then is still valid and operational today. One of the original programs from that era, still functioning, is the LA Rape and Battering Hotline, which is staffed to this day by volunteers from the diverse Los Angeles community. It has been running continuously, 24/7, 365 days a year for the past 39 years, going down only once during the Northridge earthquake in 1994. A lot has happened in 40 years. And when we gather like this, it is important to note that with all the successes and setbacks, we are still here. We are a movement made up of activists and survivors and professionals. And some of us are that all rolled into one: survivor, activist, professional. Maybe we're creating a new species. The progression since the early days of this movement has been amazing. But like true activists, we are never satisfied. After all we accomplish, we remain restless to repair, reinvent, and prevent. Activism is day to day, very much in the present. A movement is the accumulation of daily activities headed somewhere over time. We are a movement committed to taking action and making the invisible visible. There has been acceleration of our movement's work in the last decade or so, last 10 to 15 years. We have to acknowledge the importance of the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, as a critical public policy in our country. And we can look forward to the International Violence Against Women Act, IVAWA. Yeah. Recently, the staff at POV did some research on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of Denim Day in LA and Denim Day USA, a sexual violence prevention education campaign that hopefully all of you know about and have participated in some way. We issued a report called A Painful Truth, a retrospective of a decade of sexual violence. It examined what had surfaced and taken hold in consciousness across the country and activism in the last decade. Truths that society didn't know or didn't want to know. Like how many boys and girls clergy had sexually abused, and how meek and pathetic institutional responses had been. The extent to which adult men are unable to speak up or seek help about their child's sexual abuse. The hidden number of college youth sexually assaulted. How many inmates are afraid to come forward to report sexual assaults in our jails and prisons, raped by other inmates and by prison guards. The prevalence of teen dating violence, the number of enlisted women in the US military assaulted by other members of the US military. The extraordinary amount of people trafficked into this country for the sex industry, forced labor, or domestic servitude. How impactful DNA evidence could be as a public safety tool to prosecute and prevent sexual violence and to free the innocent. And how negligent authorities were in not testing rape evidence kits. In reviewing the history and the prevalence of sexual violence, the biggest lesson continues to be that there are unique and often isolated, access deprived, or marginalized and oppressed populations that face enormous amounts of sexual violence. Those most at risk, of course, children, young people, immigrants, poor and homeless women, LGBTQ persons, individuals with disabilities, and prisoners. We must continue to deconstruct who it happens to and pay attention if we are ever able to diminish these crimes and traumas to our satisfaction. It is becoming harder and harder to ignore the pervasiveness of sexual violence and to deny that this trauma impacts every sector of our society. The painful truth is that the effects and impact of the trauma of sexual violence is everywhere. How did we get here? We got here by exposing what has been too long in the shadows. We've created a body of knowledge and approaches. We've collected testimonies and amazing stories of recovery and courage and healing. We got here through the commitment of the activists, the advocates, and the professionals like you in the room. The brain trust in this ballroom at this conference is huge, and your hearts are even huger. We are tackling this painful truth together. And we do this by meeting the challenges, by challenging each other, by collaborating with not only the usual suspects, but with the unusual too, by building our own institutions or infiltrating the existing ones. We are a witnessing movement. We listen to the stories and we hear the trauma. We honor the stories of healing and recovery. And that makes us braver today than we were yesterday. We're a tough movement. It has been said that working to prevent violence is not a sprint, it's a marathon. We sometimes are too tough on each other, impatient and prickly about political correctness. And it's easy for us to want everyone else to change, for the culture to change, and we forget sometimes that change starts with us. We sometimes get stuck. Some miss what used to be. But someone told me something I've never forgotten in reference to those good old days. Look back, but don't stare. We are a very busy movement. We're constantly struggling to keep our organizations going, staffing those hotlines, developing curricula, building new programs, looking for funding, meeting deadlines, volunteering, even at our own organizations, launching prevention campaigns, and building relationship with policymakers, and the list goes on and on. And everybody is trying to catch up or stay current with technology. If one more person asks me if I Twitter or tweet, I'm going to scream. But yet we are a media movement, and we have learned how to push back and use the media for education and to tell the stories that must be told responsibly. We have enlisted the storytellers to report and dramatize our issues. As a community, we are provoked and challenged by the teachable and learnable moments that current events provide. The Chris Brown, Rihanna assault is an opportunity for youth to be challenged about their attitudes and beliefs regarding dating, violence, and healthy relationships. It was like a wake-up call for young people who didn't want to believe that their music idols could have violence in their relationship. And adults had an uncomfortable window on how youth process this kind of information. And I have to say, we were quite critical at times of youth and their attitudes, as if they are not entitled to their own process in their own developmental way. And we all know, you agree with that one? We were a little tough on our youth. When we were reading and hearing what they were saying, as if they should already know what we've already spent 40 years learning. And we all know how challenging it was for anybody to believe that Kobe Bryant could have been a sexual abuser. The story of the full suffering of the victim of that scenario after she came forward and reported has yet to be told. None of us can escape being challenged by stories that unfold in the public eye. We often find that there is more depth and complexities than we think. The Roman Polanski rearrest for a sexual crime committed over 30 years ago has been a huge challenge in understanding what happened and how justice should move forward. These national conversations are ones that we are all involved in, and it is important that we explore our preconceived ideas and talk to each other. Notice I said talk, not yell. Unless you work for Fox Television and are paid by Rupert Murdoch, then you can yell. These national conversations really do burst the secrecy bubble and hold up a mirror that often provide opportunities for people to liberate themselves from their stereotypes and for our violence prevention movement to progress. So if this movement is alive and well, and I know sometimes there's this subtle humming discourse underneath that, is it a movement? Are we a movement anymore? I say yes. The movement is alive and well. The movement needs to keep changing and thrive in myriad ways. So the question I ask myself is, of what kind of movement do we want to be going forward over the next 40 to 50 years? Perhaps instead of 5-year strategic plans, we should create 50-year plans. Remember the marathon. This is not a sprint. I will give you a window into what my movement will look like going forward. First, the name. I might call it the Movement to End Violence Against Women and Girls and All Sentient Beings. Anyone can join. Everyone's invited. There are no enemies in my movement. Every size, shape, age, mixture, gender, bender, color, shade, and vegan is okay too. And in my movement, men would be wholeheartedly welcome. Women would trust that their power would not be taken away. Neither would women give up their power. Power sharing would be the norm. Men would become more than allies, they would become partners. In my movement, there would be lots of youth and young people, for the simple reason that the batons must be passed. And because young folks have a lot of invention and fresh intention. We would really care about what goes on in our jails and prisons. In my movement, women and girls would be encouraged to train in women's self-defense and empowerment and to take charge of their own safety and autonomy. In my movement, there would be lots of different kinds of music. Afro-Cuban, Yiddish rap, reggae punk, a favorite of mine, Miles Davis, James Brown, always the Beatles, Puccini, and of course, Dylan. What is the soundtrack for your movement? Wasn't it great that we started the conference yesterday with music? I'm thinking that maybe we should start all our staff meetings with music. Pop in that iPod. In my movement, laughter would be mandatory. Now, isn't that funny, mandatory laughter? I mean, how can... In my movement, there would be more time for naps. More cell-free zones, and there would be hammocks everywhere. In my movement, there would be enormous room for compassion for victim survivors and what they go through. And there would be more space to think more broadly about offenders. Of course, including accountability, but also creating saner policies. In my movement, we would turn our anger into compassion and our suffering into understanding. We would work for public policy to be trauma-informed and hence wiser. Cultural competency would be as natural as breathing, and we would all be much more actively nicer to each other. We would be better at self-care and encourage each other to play more. What would your movement be like? The cool thing about our movement is that we all have our own personal relationship to it and what it means to us. I challenge us, however, to prepare for the new movement to prevent violence, because it is already on its way. It is truly going to be international, from California to Congo to Kabul, a global effort to inform, educate, and liberate. I hope that the feminists who started this anti-violence movement in the late 60s, early 70s, would be proud about how this movement has been stewarded over the years, and even prouder about how it will be stewarded in the future. Feminism is about many things, but for me, at its essence, it is about transformation. That is what this movement is fundamentally about. Transforming our lives, transforming language and culture, forging a culture of equality, opportunity, justice, diversity, fairness, inclusivity, compassion, all moving toward a culture of peace. We know what we are against, but now we must articulate what we are for. That's the kind of movement I want us to create in the future. We must be active and brave in defining this culture of peace. Our agency changed its name about 3 years ago to embrace its growth and maturity. We searched for a name that expressed who we had become. We wanted a name that would inspire and one we could aspire to. So we chose Peace Over Violence. What does that mean, peace? I Googled definitions of peace. There were 8 million sites. So many definitions and so little peace. Yeah, go figure. The Dalai Lama says there can be no peace without freedom. Mahatma Gandhi teaches us that peace is not the absence of violence, but the presence of justice. So, of course, does Martin Luther King, who said that true peace is not the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. Peace isn't something that humans might achieve at the end of some apocalyptic vision. Peace exists. We can create and expand it in small ways in our everyday lives and in our interactions with each other. Peace constantly changes. It's not permeable. It's not static. It is imperfect. It's not utopian. It is an option, and it can be chosen. Peace needs to be our most important option, present in every struggle, every challenge. Peace for our agency is a very roll-up-your-sleeves practice of violence prevention and healing through intervention, advocacy, and education. Someone said, peace is a daily, a weekly, a monthly process, slowly eroding old barriers, quietly building new structures. That is what the advocates for rape survivors, battered women, and their allies have been doing for the past 40 years, overcoming the barriers and creating options, from the personal to the professional to the political. Peace Over Violence continues to explore what peace over violence means. Our organization continues to stretch to embrace our brand and our vision mission of building healthy relationships, families, and communities free from sexual, domestic, and interpersonal violence. I recently had the opportunity to receive instruction in something called the Peacemaking Pyramid. The Peacemaking Pyramid is a theory of change that aims for a change of heart, from a heart at war to a heart at peace. As a community, we often want to fix what is wrong, and we choose to do it by attacking the problem, which is at the top of the pyramid. The war on drugs, the war on gangs, the war on crime, the war on war. And we never seem to win those wars. The peacemaking pyramid model suggests that we put a lot of energy into the bottom of the pyramid, into going deeper, spending the necessary time building relationships, listening and learning, teaching and communicating. This theory of change focuses on helping things go right by building on relationships, strengths, and connection. I want to close with words that inspired me. Violence is always the wrong choice. We realize that people are angry, but let the anger cause change that is necessary to keep our children, our neighbors, and our friends safe. Those words are from a 15-year-old girl who was gang raped on her school campus after a homecoming dance in Richmond, California, while bystanders watched and did nothing. The heart of this 15-year-old rape victim survivor is a heart at peace. We can learn from her. My hope for our movement is that we approach our work and our world with a peaceful heart. I would like to share our organization's manifesto, and I think it's up on the screen. Our vision is a world without violence, where no child is abused, no wife battered, no friend raped. A world without terror, without threats, without wounds from intentional actions. Where the strong provide for the vulnerable, where the vulnerable become empowered, where every kind of family is safe and secure, and girls and boys and women and men have a fair and equal chance at the pursuit of happiness in a tolerant and talented society. And that's a world I'm sure we would all like to live in. Thank you for all that you have done and will continue to do, and let's keep the movement moving. Thank you very much.